people back. Let's restart the record. Oh, look, Nathan, you read my mind. That's the recording back on. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope we're feeling refreshed and ready for our next item on the agenda. So we're up to item number 6. This is our Integrated Performance and Quality Report, or IPQR, and I shall hand over to David to steer us through this. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, everyone. You should have a copy of the IPQR. It's in the combined papers from pages 123 to 164. As usual, these metrics have already gone through the various committees, and the chairs have already alluded to that in their earlier segment. And there's a fair degree of consistency in both the discussion, the highlights, as well as what you're seeing in the report. Just to draw a few things in opening to your attention of some of the highlights. I should also mention that this pretty much takes us to the end of March with our reporting. So it is taking us to the end of the last financial year. CAMS, we've seen a further reduction in our waiting lists, and we've been tracking that reduction and anticipating when it starts to hit the performance criteria, and you'll see that it has started to do that with a rise in performance to 79.5% in the month to March. AD performance has increased to 82.6%, and against that a national average of 71%. And while we are still experiencing substantial pressures around our front door, we have noticed that our performance has been consistently better than the majority of the other boards across Scotland, but still we strive to improve that. For vaccinations, we've seen an increase in our 6-in-1 uptake, but MMR uptake is still below the national average. And alcohol brief interventions continues to exceed the target. But in contrast to that, delayed discharges still remains above our target and remains one of our most challenging areas in terms of improvement. Fiona's highlighted in her update earlier, and indeed we had a development session where waiting times, particularly around outpatients and TTG, has been a particular national focus, and there is a lot of attention and scrutiny and review of that at the moment. Just maybe to draw one item that's maybe a slight error in reporting around outpatients. It said 61%. Actually, that 61% represents our outpatients performance, including our nursing-led activity. So that's probably what the public are experiencing in terms of outpatients performance. But from a reportable point of view, it's 39% because it's only the consultant-led activity that's reported from a national perspective. So that should have been the number that's in the report. That's quite close to the national average of 41%, but we have set a very aggressive plan in terms of recovery, particularly in relation to long waits. Now, you'll see monitoring of that in the coming reports, both to the committee, the FPR committee, as well as to the board. Just to give you an idea of scale of these, from the report, you'll see that over 52-week waits was currently just under 5,000 people who are waiting. Our target by the end of this financial year is that would reduce to about 1,100. So there's a lot of work, and recognising that's not a static number, but there's obviously people who will fall into that time slot over the period, but that's taken into account in terms of our projections. TTG is exceeding plan in terms of our activity. You'll see that from the report. Our performance is at 65.4%. That's 5th out of the 15 territorial boards. with a national average of 56.3%. So that leaves us in a very good relative position. As far as the over 52 weeks are concerned, then it's showing currently at the end of March at about 1,000 patients, but that's going to be forecasted to reduce it to about 200 patients by the end of March 26. Imaging and diagnostics are meeting more or less meeting our ADP plan, and endoscopy is outperforming the other areas, but still remains a challenging picture within imaging and diagnostics in terms of our forward plan going into this coming year. Cancer services is relatively stable at 91% for 31 days and improved slightly for 62 days at 76%, and indeed is above now the national average. But I think that's more that the national average is coming down in conjunction with our slight uptick in relation to that. Psychological therapies has been a good news story throughout the year, and the team have made great strides in recovering that position, and it's better than the national average, not quite at the national target, but is still performing well from where it was. Into the quality section, complaints performance, response time has dropped to 25%, responded to within 20 days. But you'll see that the SPSO cases have seen more closures than additions in the last 2 reporting periods. Falls and tissue viability performance is relatively static, but falls causing injury has seen some improvement. And the people metrics, the trends have continued, so we have been reporting, and as Philip mentioned earlier, both in terms of vacancy time to fill, absence recording, as well as training. So with that, I will open up to questions of other colleagues on the call. Obviously, we've no Gareth today at this part of the section, but we'll do our best to try and field any questions that may come up in that space, but happy to open up for others to raise their hands.
Thank you, David. That was a whirlwind tour through the headlines of the IPQR. That's really helpful. Okay, let's open up for questions and comments, please. Bert, I'll bring you in.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, David. It's just a question about the SAERs. So in relation to the actions that are overdue, there are 76. I wonder how long the longest outstanding action is, please. I realise things are being monitored in each operational area, but of those actions which are overdue, I just wonder what the level of risk is to the organisation and to patients in relation to these actions. Thanks.
Thanks, Bert. I'll maybe direct that to Boyd if you want to come in.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for the question, Bert. The vast majority of the outstanding actions are actually very old, and they were where a small meeting looking at one problem has made a recommendation based on that lens, but the recommendation is one that can't be actively or easily implemented across the whole organisation, sometimes because it can't be applied in the same way equally everywhere, sometimes because it's not relevant, or in some cases because the action that was thought of at the time is subsequently out of date because of changes that have occurred. What we haven't done is find a way to close off quite a number of these. And so the nurse director and I have taken this to our various professional direct reports, looking for a methodology whereby we can, in the instances I've described, can, with validity, close off actions that are not actionable anymore, or that were never deliverable at an organisational level, but may have had a relevance to an individual case. when we have a methodology for that, we should see those numbers drop. Some of the numbers link to other more recent cases where actually the suggested improvement is one that will take time, perhaps require an estates project or something that will take quite a long time to deliver. And for those, we will of course keep a watching brief, as they may take some years to be completed.
Thanks, Boyd. Louise, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just to add, I think one of the things we're also trying to stress is how do we ensure that we're doing the right thing moving forward. So yes, we've got that backlog and things that we've got to find a resolution for and resolve. But equally, how do we get into a rhythm as we progress? And I think we're better at that. I think I see Elaine nodding. I think we're getting to a better place around that in terms of making recommendations as they should be. But again, it's always a development area, I think.
Thanks for your question, Bert. Well, come to Emily, please.
Thanks, David. Just one minor question on the emergency department access data. There's a mention of it equates to 38 patients waiting over 12 hours, but it wasn't clear to me whether that's per month, per quarter, or another time period. I just wondered if I could clarify, and potentially if that could be specified in future iterations. The other question was around appraisal rates for Gareth, just in terms of it mentions that directors and direct reports are supposed to be complete by October 24. I'm not sure, is that a typo related to 25, or can we find out if that actually happened by 24 and just really progress with that initiative, because the rates still seem quite low to me. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It would, in first instance, seem like a typo error in that regard, Emily, but I will follow up with Gareth just to clarify that. Catherine, do you want to address the ED performance over 12 hours?
Yeah, our ED performance is measured daily, Emily, but obviously we look at cumulative totals over weeks, over months, and also over the year. In terms of this particular report, I think the information that you're being presented with is weekly data and performance over the weekly data.
Thanks for your question, Emily. Alex.
Yeah, thanks, David. I was actually, for once, I was going to say that I think the appraisals is actually starting to pick up a little bit. You can see the trend going up, so that's good. But we'll see how this plan works out to improve things. I assumed it was 25 rather than 24, but anyway. My question is for Jennifer on the children's vaccinations. The trend on MMR1 and MMR2 continues to fall, whereas the 6 and 1 at least has picked up now. Do we understand, or is it just vaccination overload, or is there a reason why we just can't seem to get this trend upwards at all? Thanks.
Come on, Jennifer. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for that. It is a trend we're seeing nationally, so we're not an outlier in the sense that we're seeing this continued downward trend against a whole range of different vaccinations. So there's a lot of work that's going on nationally through Public Health Scotland and other colleagues to really try and get under the skin of that, to really understand. I don't think it's one particular factor. I think it's a combination of factors, which means that the way that we address it needs to also be cognizant of the fact. So some of it can be around health literacy, it can be about misinformation, it can be about fatigue, it can be about access to and ease of, and it can be a whole range of, and those are going to be the elements that are going to be vital in how we build our future model. But it is, I agree, it is a concerning picture to see this continue to go down. And it's not just in Scotland either, it is across all nations we're seeing this. So it is well recognised as an issue and something that is causing angst within the public health community, as you can imagine, and very much something that we're aware of and needing to work on.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Alex. Muriel, can I come to you, please?
Thank you, David, and thank you for the report. Quick question. There was sorry, I'm reading off my screen here. The radiology workshop in December 24 identified areas of improvement. Was there anything identified there about the national shortage of radiologists and where that fits in with the improvement programme? Because the way it's written, it looks like operational tweaks and tidy up, so to speak. But where do we sit with that? Because we are struggling when you look at it, our placing in the national table. Thank you.
Thanks, Muriel. I'll come to Catherine on that one. Thanks, Catherine.
Yeah, so as you'll be aware, Muriel, the recruitment for radiologists is our biggest challenge. So we absolutely recognise the need to have radiologists, and you know, ideally we would have them absolutely on site in Raigmore, and also as they used to do, travelling to the rural general hospitals to provide on-site service there. The reality of the situation is that we are not able to recruit radiologists. We have been recruiting some, but not at the rate that we would like to be able to do to have a fully comprehensive radiologist service delivered locally. You will no doubt be aware that we outsource significantly and use outsourcing companies to support and fill that gap for radiologists. I think the increasing or rather the numbers that are over waiting times, having looked into the detail of that relates to the MRI service, and we've recently had the van come back again. So it's not so much the radiologist as the capacity to deliver, and particularly in relation to MRI and also ultrasound is the other area that we've been challenged with. So we've been working with the sonography team to see what we can do to increase and enhance additional sonography workforce. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, Muriel. Jerry.
Thank you, David. I've got a question about the drug and alcohol recovery services. It's on the agenda for the Health and Social Care Committee at the beginning of September for our annual review. So I was looking at the data for it, and we're not seeing any improvement in our waiting times. Effectively, if anything, they're actually getting significantly worse. And when we spoke about this about a year ago at the committee, we were talking about a change in focus, moving to the DARS team being more focused on specialist services and commissioning a non-dependent service. And I just wonder if there has been any progress on that, because it does seem to be an ever worsening position. Thank you, David.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry, for the question. Louise, do you want to make comment, please?
I'm wondering whether Arlene was wanting to come in on that point.
She is. She's got her hand up. Arlene, please.
Yeah, I can come in on that. Yes, Jerry, we have completed the tender now for the digital recovery support service within DARS, which has been commissioned in partnership with the ADAP, and we kind of combined two pots of money in order to do that. They, I believe, are due to start, I think it might be the 18th of this month. If not, it's certainly very, very short, very, very soon. So it has taken a bit of time to get through the commissioning elements of it, but that's now in place. And we'll have more detail around about the other reasonings in relation to the waiting times when we come to the Health and Social Care Committee. We can get into the detail then.
Thanks, Arlene. Sarah.
Thanks, David. I suppose the question that I've got came into my head when I was looking at the data around endoscopy, but I suppose actually it kind of relates to a lot of different things. So, you know, when we look at the data, there's lots of different ways to analyze it. And if we take endoscopy as an example, we can see that against our yearly target of kind of activity, we've done more than more than is planned. So I think, the target was 6,576, but we've so far done 6,866. So that's good. We've done more. So we're clearly kind of, doing the work and getting people the service that they need. But then when we look at the wait times, that's a slightly different way to look at it, and that's a different lens to look through. And I suppose my question is actually, how is that information passed back to Scottish Government, and how is that taken into account? Not so much in terms of setting targets, because obviously, regardless of how many people require a service, we want them to receive it in a timely manner and for the quality to be good. But I suppose I'm interested, this data feeds up into Scottish Government, but where you have data that tells you that, regardless of us doing lots of activity that is higher than we had planned, there is still a significant waiting time, or waiting times are not shifting. That's painting a picture about demand and how the service responds to that. And I just wonder actually if someone can just say a little bit about how that data is fed back into Scottish Government, how those conversations mature in terms of whether targets need to be adjusted, or whether indeed maybe funding gets adjusted, or the way that we deliver things has to be reviewed. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I'll start off, and I'll maybe bring in Catherine and maybe even Boyd from a clinical point of view after that. I think as part of the focus around planned care, then the focus has also been on various other support services that sit around that, and imaging and indeed laboratories is another area where we've seen demand go up significantly. I think in terms of reporting, then we keep a track of what did we say we were going to do in the year. But the reality is demand is increasing in these areas, and that's down to clinical practice. And indeed, if you come across things like MRI, for example, then that's very much a focus at a national level with regard to overall capacity, and recognising that as we step up not only our planned activity but our outpatients activity, then demand is growing in these investigative areas, and we are very much looking at what our capacity is and being able to respond to demand. But I think there's also the question about our clinical practice that is cumulatively increasing the demand in those services. So it's very much one that we have to watch carefully. Catherine, I don't know if there's anything you want specifically to add on to that, and then I'll maybe come to Boyd.
No, I think at a high level, David, you've covered it off. That's managing demand, capacity, activity, and queue is a complicated exercise, particularly when you're doing that across a complex system. Obviously, if we do pick up and we start to deliver more outpatient appointments, more TTG, then we will increase the demand on our diagnostic service. As a part of planning, we do take that into consideration as well, and we have received funding from the Scottish Government to support us in terms of particularly ultrasound capacity, as I mentioned earlier, and also in relation to our MRI van that we have to bring on site. So we look at that, David, as you've described, to try to manage that. Obviously, more and more there is as technology moves on, more than anything, particularly in imaging, the demand continues to spiral. And, we are trying to shift diagnostics to earlier in patient pathways so that we can sift and sort our patients into the right pathways as early on as possible. And that continues to put more pressure on the diagnostic service.
Thanks, Catherine. Boyd?
Thanks, David. Just to try and answer Sarah's specific part of a question, clinical data of this nature, and you've mentioned one that was of interest, but there are so many. The plugins to, if we call it Scottish Government, but what we mean is NHS Scotland, and to all of the offices that sit below SG and NHS Scotland, then there are a large number of different groupings there. So it's actually very difficult to track what information goes in and how that might influence national targets. In its best times, national targets are get a strong clinical steer offered from learned bodies that will be able to say what are the most valid targets, because not all targets give the same validity. But as we know, sometimes targets can be set as one easily obtained number is picked out as an example target because there are so many, there are too many to track everything. And that's why, for instance, we have 31, 62 day targets. We've got the familiar ED targets with 4-hour access, etc. And most clinicians and those actively managing services would acknowledge that those targets as standalones do not really give the full nuance and indication of the complexity and the multi-steps in any pathway that you could measure, and in fact we often do. So the answer is that there's a large amount of information goes in to national bodies and groups, and that can then come back into board as quite a lot of different targets and messages about what they would like to see. The challenge then when it comes back, bounces back to board, is as ever, every board, and ours is one, but all boards are affected by this, you have to juggle all services, you have to juggle your limitations, number of staff, you have to just juggle the variations in local demand and other factors. And so some of the art of it comes back to how we manage that locally and how we look at all the targets that we would set, as well as those that have been picked in the process I've mentioned at a national level, so there can be comparisons across the country, which is useful for across the country analysis, but for a local analysis in terms of our services working for all the people who need those services, we probably have to look at it through a local lens as well, and across many more measurables than the few that are picked out in the way that I have described. I hope that helps, Sarah. And it is such a nuanced topic, it could be quite a good one for a board development session in the future.
Thanks, Boyd. I think it's also due to mention that government have not relaxed any of the targets that they set, and many of these were set many years ago, certainly pre-COVID, before waiting lists grew to the extent that they have. And what they typically do is they then focus in particular areas as they are around planned care recovery and over 52-week waits, for example, but don't necessarily change the published target. So that's why there's an element of some of these targets will be specific, and some of these are a bit legacy in that respect. And so we try to keep track of what we commit to in our ADP, which is our agreement with government, as well as what their local and more recent emphases may be as we try to respond. Okay, I think that concludes it. I'll hand back to Sarah. Thanks very much for your questions. They're always helpful for us to make sure that we're looking in the right things and the areas that are of interest to you. So thank you.
Oh, that's great. And thank you for taking us through that, David. And I suppose just to pick up a couple of those closing points. Obviously, as we move through the rest of the agenda today, some of what we're looking at is sort of a look to the future and how we want to sort of refresh and readjust ourselves to respond to some of those future changes. And I suppose I'm always mindful that the IPQR is very much a living document, and we tweak it and adjust it as we go along. And I think as Boyd pointed out, there is so much data out there that we could be looking at, and I think it's helpful for us to consider as board members what we want to see in what format and when and where, to give us the assurance at the right level, bearing in mind that we do also have our committee structures to look into the various elements of this at a deeper level. But that's really, really helpful. And I think the one thing that the IPQR always does, which we can't really do at committee, is give that overall sort of snapshot of things and where we are. So that's really helpful. Thank you very much. But as always, and as David has said, if members have got feedback about content or style or format, we're always interested to hear what works or what doesn't work, so that we can keep it fresh and relevant for the work that we're doing. Okay, thank you, David and colleagues. So if I just find my right bit of paper. So we were being asked to consider the level of performance across the system and note the continued and sustained pressures facing the NHS and commissioned care services. And we are currently proposing a limited assurance, just given some of the areas of pressure that we're experiencing. Is everybody okay with that? Great. Okay, good. Fantastic. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is never a bad thing. So I'm going to take us on to item number 7. So this is the 6-monthly update against the Director of Public Health annual report that Tim did for us 6 months ago. And I'm going to invite Jennifer for the first time. Welcome, Jennifer, to take us through this item, please.
Yes, thank you. So as always, accepting that everybody's had an opportunity to read the report. So as you quite rightly say, not only did the DPH report, which is a statutory requirement produced each year, come through the board, but what was also quite notable is that the board accepted the recommendations, which isn't always usual, and I think is noteworthy, for it signifies really the appetite and the direction of travel for the organisation. So in the report, what you'll find is the recommendations that were laid out, and an update against those in Appendix 1. It's worth being clear that that isn't a comprehensive list of all the activity that would be contributing against those recommendations. The very nature of those recommendations, some are very broad and more about how we embed our thinking and ways of working, and some are slightly more specific. So there isn't currently a mechanism by which we would systematically collect that update against those, but I'm hoping that what people will see and have from that assurances that there is work happening against all of those recommendations. In addition to those updates, there's also been some other significant developments which are noted noted in the paper around an agreement, as it was intimated there by yourself, Sarah, around the organisational strategy refresh, and that, you know, recognising the desire to bring in and build in tackling health inequalities as part of the core to that. There's also the establishment of a new population health and planning committee, which will therefore take a lead role in helping to develop the strategy and help to form some governance around the implementation against the aspiration. And it comes at a time when also nationally, many of you will have already read and you know, taken in what we've seen around the population health framework and the service renewal framework, to name just but 2 of the national drivers. In taking on all of those different aspects, sometimes it can feel a little bit difficult to know how we translate all of the evidence and all of the calls to action into what we're able to do as a health board. And one way of thinking about it is thinking about it through that functional elements as a healthcare provider, as a significant employer in the area, as an anchor institution, and in our role within partnerships, and that's quite a key role across a number of different partnerships. So I think that's pretty much what I really wanted to recognise, and that given that there's going to be a new committee established, future updates will probably go, we're proposing, through to that committee, and the work that's been progressed and started underneath this against this report will inform the development of the future organisational strategy. I'm happy to take any comments and questions.
No, that's great. Thank you, Jennifer. And you're right. You've explained there how this kind of dovetails into the other work that that's going on. And I think it would be fair to say that publishing, when Tim published that annual report, and indeed when the board accepted the recommendations, I think that was a real catalyst in moving us forward around the work that's happening with the Population Health Committee and other things. So I'm really delighted to see this update coming to the board. I think you've quite rightly pointed out that this is not absolutely everything, and by the nature of the work, there will be a lot of things going on that don't necessarily get captured explicitly within this. But I think what we've got in this report is a great overview of a lot of the work. So that's really good. I'm really keen to open this up for questions and comments. This is, of course, the kind of the first time we've done this in this way against a Director of Public Health annual report. So it's something a bit new and a bit different. But I'm keen to hear if colleagues have got any comments or questions that they want to pop in at this point. Got a couple more, but we'll see if anyone else wants to come in. Okay, I'll keep going. Just for, oh, sorry, Boyd, go on.
Thanks, Chair. Well, I was going to fill the gap as well as you were going to. It's just to note, since health inequalities has been a big part of the public health drive lately and is relevant for us, we took this out to some of the medical committees, particularly the GP sub, because the placed as healthcare providers placed in communities, they are well positioned to be aware excuse me, of the health inequalities that we have in the Highlands, which of course will look very different to, say, what you might see in the more urbanised central belt parts of Scotland, and trying to build that relevance locally, and so the report was well received and has stimulated good discussion and good thought among some of our clinical communities, which is what I want to represent at board today.
Okay, that's really good to hear that, Boyd. Thank you. And I'm really pleased it's been taken through those forums. I think that's an important part of the engagement, so I really welcome that. Thank you. I'll bring Jerry in, please.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm probably at the risk of sounding like a broken record. It's sometimes, and I'm not looking to have a conversation about this today. I'll probably make my usual comment. It says I'm still not in a warm and fuzzy place as it relates to our role as a board in relation to corporate parenting and the promise, etc., etc. So I think I would like us to pick that up at some point. But my specific question was this morning, still this morning, was really in relation to we supported this Tim's report in January, and we've had a really big piece of work going on in relation to vaccination improvement in the six months since then, both in developing an improvement journey and developing a new model of delivery. And I just wondered if we could get some insight as to how we've adopted these health inequality principles in developing the solutions which we're proposing to take forward. Just as a practical example. Thank you.
Shall I come in on that, Sarah?
Yes, go for it, Jennifer.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. It's very much been part of the development of the model. It's recognising that whilst we will usually report on the high level overall uptake, we do still have further insight into different groups and vulnerabilities across different groups. And as I was referencing earlier in the question around vaccination, sometimes that's to do with access, sometimes it's to do with knowledge and health literacy, sometimes it's to do with other elements. So, but it is about, in the approach that we're developing, it's recognizing that there are differential uptakes. We tend to use the crude measure of the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, but here in the Highlands, and something probably you're familiar with from previous reports, that doesn't work in quite the same way as it does elsewhere. And so we have to be careful how we use that. But it is often a case of triangulating different information so that we can really understand where we need to be doing more targeted work, and then working off the back of that in a cyclical way to learn, develop and improve. So it is very much, we are cited on the inequity element, which is the important bit here. It's about that differential outcome, even though we're offering the same thing. So we can't be offering the same thing. It's not an equality piece. It's the equity element and needing to approach it differently in order to get different outcomes, but with the aim of everybody having an increased uptake to the level that is protective of the population. So I hope that answers it.
And I think Fiona wanted to come in as well there.
Well, it was just to pick up maybe the part that Jerry was referencing about the children's partnerships. And I think if I just build on your comments earlier, Sarah, I think for me, it feels like there's a number of threads that are all coming together at a similar time. And Tim's report that was brought to us at the beginning of the year and the board's acceptance of the recommendations was one of those threads. But if you like, the work that we're doing on the lead agency model, the work we're doing in Argyll and Bute around the single authority model, these are all threads that we're trying to weave together to build this new strategic approach, where as a board we can really embrace our responsibility to trying to improve the health of our population across Highland and Argyll and Bute, but recognising that there's a complexity to trying to change, if I call it our inner landscape, the things we're directly accountable for, simultaneously with the influence that we have with partners where we don't have that direct accountability. We have a relationship, a convening power, other kind of more nuanced ways of operating. And we're needing to rethink how we do that, but do it all at the same time, because the earlier conversation we had around the finance plan made it clear that we're doing that in an environment that's more constrained around finance than we've ever had in the past. So we know that if we're going to look to change, we have to work right across our inner landscape and our outer world to make that happen. So I think that children's relationship will be a key part of how we reweave these threads together in a different way as we build a new strategic approach. And that's going to take the output of this update, which again I would really welcome and thank Jennifer for bringing forward so early in her tenure in the role. But I think it has to be seen alongside those other threads, because it's only as we bring it all together that hopefully we will shift our approach as a board and get the movement in a world that feels quite stuck to a lot of people in the public at the current time.
I think that's a really good point, Fiona. And actually, we could put this kind of conversation under a number of agenda items today, couldn't we? But I think, you know, at risk of having a conversation that we'll have in the next item, I think you're right about that complexity of that working in that partnership space and how all the threads are pulling together. And I suppose what we need to do as a board and as an organisation is create the environment where we can work through that complexity, and the spaces that will feel a little bit uncomfortable because those lines of accountability and governance are not as clear as I think you've just described, so that we can get the outcomes that we need. And you're right, it links into so many of the other conversations that we're having around you know, integration arrangements, partnership working, where we want to go with our strategic direction, all those other bits and pieces. So I think that's a really, really good point. I'll bring Karen in, and then I've got a couple of questions as well. So Karen, I'll bring you in next.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Jennifer. I really welcome the report again, as Fiona said so early in your story in the NHS Highland. My comments are similar, really, but specifically in relation to community planning partnerships. And I'm going to carry on with Fiona's analogy, and I'm going to ask us to start thinking about developing a kilt because I think that's pulling all the weaves together. And if we can work out what our threads are around that kilt, that might actually help us as well as everybody else. I think as Fiona said, all of the kind of bits and pieces, that all the different amazing amount of work that's going across, I find it really exciting, the amount of work that's going on. In some ways, the amount of work that's been challenged towards us from Scottish Government, I think that's, that we should welcome some of this for sure, but also that kind of opening our eyes to the role of partners and our role in that anchor organisation kind of format. I think for me, one of the things will be really key as we move forward, and that's why I was thinking about it from a community planning partnership, is the resource sharing. Because I think it's how do we take advantage of all the resources, whether that be a building or someone with a lot of specialist skills. And picking up on a conversation I had with a colleague in Argyll and Bute yesterday, the real benefit that she found from being able to work with colleagues with a specific skill set in the NHS Highland corporate team that she doesn't have access to in the IJB in the same way. So actually looking at that kind of system-wide thinking and being brave enough to say, we don't have it here, but we have it here. How do we find a way to use those resources across? And so I think that, that kilt will look fantastic. At the minute, it's a little bit patchy and wobbly, but actually that idea in my head now feels really simple in a funny way. Never made a kilt, never weaved a plaid thing, however you pronounce it. But, I think that's a kind of way to kind of get it into other people's heads maybe as well, might be useful. But I really welcome that kind of idea of community planning partnership working in a different way, because I find that a little bit of I don't quite understand how that works particularly. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing how that develops. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. What's that say? There's a saying, isn't there? The more colours to your tartan, the stronger the weft in the weave, or something like that. So I think that's a good one. I think I've got it on a mug somewhere. That's good. I've got a couple of questions as well, or a couple of points that I wanted to make, and I'm just now struggling to find the actual page that I was looking at when I wrote these cryptic notes for myself. I wonder if, sorry, I'm just looking at something here around risk. And we've maybe captured it, but I think there is a risk, just coming back to that complexity and how I think we all recognise how that is going to have to work together, as Karen and Fiona have described. I think that, so there's a risk captured there around the strategic risk. There's a risk also around the operational risk if we don't fully engage, and that's maybe enough to cover it. I suppose what worries me is we're moving into this sort of slightly brave new world and thinking about population health in a way that we haven't thought about it before. One of the challenges or issues that I hear a lot nationally is that, this stuff is much harder to pin down numerically like we would with some of our other stuff. It's much harder to put it on a graph or display it in a way that maybe traditionally we're comfortable with in this sector. So I like Jennifer, what you said about focusing on those sort of functional approaches, so what we're doing as an anchor organisation, what we're doing as an employer. So all of those things, I think that's a really helpful lens to look at it through. And I suppose it's just a building on that operational risk. I think if we can't find a way to articulate some of this clearly in a way that is understandable not only to our organisation but to our communities, we will struggle. Because I suppose we've talked about the organisation fully engaging with this, but actually we need our partners and communities to engage with it as well by the very nature of what it is. So I think there's something there about the risk that if we can't demonstrate, articulate all of that stuff in a way that's easy to understand, then it might not be as successful as it could be. And that's a sort of a by the by comment. But a couple of things that I did want to just pull out specifically, and it is quite specific, but there's a section where we talk about and again, she's trying to find the highlighted bit. There's a section where we talk about equality impact assessments. And I think that that is something that would be of interest to board members looking at a little bit more deeply, maybe in a development session or something else. I think it's something that we've come to time, you know, in the past, it's come up where people are interested in how we're doing our impact assessments, and if through that process we can get a level of assurance around certain things. So I think that would be something that people would be interested in being a part of. And of course, I suppose we've got impact assessments in the traditional sense, but we also of course have island impact assessments, which are really relevant for a lot of our communities as well. So I think there's something for the future that would be helpful for us to look at around that impact assessment and the processes. And of course, as you've said, sort of going into that new committee as well and the work that we want to undertake there. But sorry, that was a big ramble. Jennifer, you've got your hand up. I'll let you come in for a minute.
Well, that's quite helpful because it picks up on both those points, because it sort of relates to that a discussion that we've had a bit earlier about what data is the right data to look at, and how does that help provide us with an assurance on progress and choosing the right sorts of data points, because you're quite right, we're very familiar with certain types of data sets and we're less familiar on other elements. And it's about recognizing that across those functional domains, there are different ways that we can measure activity. And it's understanding how much of that is inputs and activity in relation to what sort of outcome and impact will that achieve. And it's understanding how they relate to one another, and going through that process, I think, as a board and through that committee will hopefully help to therefore see how the equality impact assessments, for example, is an indicator, yes, around the quality of those. I think there's something about quality and quantum. And how does that help to signify a more systematic approach to considering health inequalities? So it is a tool that can be used, and therefore is a measure that can be brought to help provide assurance or indicate where we need to be targeting our thinking differently. So I think it ties into the same element, and there is some work already underway to identify some high level, what I would call system or population level indicators, which references back to Karen, a little bit of what you were describing there, but what it is also part of the conversation we've had. In order to drive down health inequalities, it isn't something one organisation can do alone. And that's the bit that we're recognising here. That does mean that we should have regard for what are our population health indicators, but then we will also need to have due regard as to what is it that we can own internally, that we want to work against, that shows our commitment and that we are making progress towards. But there also has to be that marrying up, that we're choosing things to work on that marry up with where the rest of the system and our partners are at. And that's the conversation that I think has been has led to the development of a kilt, I think. So I think it ties in quite nicely.
Thanks, Jennifer. I mean, not to get ahead of ourselves here, but, you know, if we're doing like some kind of strategy refresh, probably haven't thought about images and branding, but I'm sensing like a kilt theme coming through, you know, not in the traditional sense, maybe we'll go a really colourful one. Okay, right. So I'm not seeing any other hands up. I think this is a really, really positive update to the board. I'm really, really delighted to see it. It ties in beautifully with what's coming up next on the agenda. And as the recommendations say, in fact, I'll recap the recommendations. So we are being asked to note the content of the report and the summary update in relation to those recommendations. Note that the report recommendations will be key in developing the strategic framework, and note that the future updates will be assured via the Population Health and Planning Committee, and I believe the first meeting of that committee will be in the autumn, so it's coming up in the calendars, and we are being offered moderate assurance on this one. Is everybody happy with that? Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jennifer, and what a great item to bring to the board, your first board meeting in post, and we really look forward to seeing how that develops and obviously getting the updates through the new committee. And then it kind of segues beautifully into item number 8 on the agenda, which is around our board strategy. So this is looking at the planning the policy frameworks and performance reporting. So I'm going to invite Kristen to speak to this item, please.
Very much, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. So yes, hopefully this won't be repetitive in any way, shape or form following the IPQR and in the last agenda item, but it does link in nicely. So the key kind of highlights to update the board on since we last discussed the annual delivery plan is that it's now been approved by the Scottish Government just a fortnight ago in early July, and it has been seen as a robust framework for the delivery of the current strategy, our Together We Care strategy, and we will continue to monitor our performance through our quarterly IPQR function, but moving away from the kind of deliverables as such and more into our KPIs, which you've been aware of the work that we're doing around that to try and strengthen the work that we're doing, which links into the operational improvement plan. As part of that, though, the government have kind of identified that our ADPs are now really considered as within that whole evolving context that we've been talking about, but more as a kind of support to local planning and our more local alignment to priorities. But as part of the 3 products that were launched, the operational improvement plan, which is described as the kind of first component of them, will really be the main vehicle around how we will be pursuing these national priorities for the board. So we've got the population health framework and the service renewal framework that we've discussed already, so I'll not repeat that. And they're really the kind of long-term planning, sustainability work that we're looking at, and that they'll be helping us support our the creation of our new strategy and how we will plan and deliver our services for the whole population. But the operational improvement plan is really the element of development that now we will be working on, and there's 4 main key areas within that, and the first being around really our planned care, scheduled care, looking at driving down and improving access to care, driving down our waiting times that you've heard us discuss already. Where that's the most established element of the OIP just now, and then we're working to develop and reinforce our new trajectories around our unscheduled care work and the additional funding that we're getting there. The third element of the operational improvement plan is around digital and improving access to care through the use of technology. And last is obviously the prevention and preventing illness and proactively managing patients' needs and working that through. So we've seen over the last few months significant scrutiny for our board chief execs, and CFSD have been working closely with us just in how we link and performance manage these 4 elements of the OIP, and that will be consolidated and planned going forward through our exec groups. And really that will be the vehicle that will take over the main scrutiny from the ADP going forward, will be the operational improvement plan. So we are making sure that all of the deliverables within the operational improvement plan are linked through the annual delivery plan, and it all links through our governance, through FRPC, and into yourselves as the board. I won't go into all of the detail of the paper, which actually lays out exactly the targets that we will be monitoring, but you will see them coming through the next transfer window and iteration of the IPQR, as I've already discussed. We've also put in there well, Jennifer's obviously talked about the development of our new strategic framework that we need to build our new strategy on with the population health lens through that. So we've got we've shared really a diagram there which shows the kind of details of the model, and we'll be taking through the new committee this framework in which we can build on, as you said, into the autumn, and we'll be building our governance through that. So I'm not really sure if there's much more for me to say, because we've obviously just been building on the previous 2 items, but happy to take any questions on that. Hope that covers everything you need there. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen. And again, this is, on the theme of trying to pull threads together. I think you've explained to us there about, how we pull together something we're very familiar with, which is the ADP, and then how that's going to look and feel going forwards, pulling in the operational improvement plan, and then of course the other frameworks around population health and service renewal. But let's open up for questions and comments around this. I recognise it's all a bit of a movable feast at the moment, so this is a kind of an update as we go along. So happy if people want to check things out and clarify things. Muriel, I'll bring you in, please.
Thank you, and thank you for the paper, Kirsten. My observation relates to the previous 2 presentations as well, and I'm not sure there's an answer, but I'm going to comment anyway. So I do apologise. But how have we got a methodology in mind, or going forward, how to measure the early intervention success that we're hoping to achieve? Because we talk a lot about early intervention health improvements. Have we got a methodology? How do we collect data around about that? Because we're funding some programs, but how do we measure the outcomes? Are they measurable?
Thanks, Muriel. I don't know there's probably a few people I could think of who might want to come in on this. I don't know. Kristen, maybe you can kick off and then others can come in to support.
I think I'd maybe ask Jennifer if she could come in on that, if that would be all right. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
A really good question, Muriel, and it is answerable. But there's no one straightforward answer. So I guess what it tries to do is to articulate that it's almost like putting a marker in the sand to say that in any progression of a disease, there is usually an early marker at which we could have prevented it. And it is about recognizing at what stage that is, and the intervention that could or should be put in place. So that will vary hugely. So for example, it could be something as simple as intervening early in terms of long-term conditions management with increased physical activity interventions. So that would be, but your early identification would be increasing blood pressure, in a healthcare scenario. I'm now sort of describing it, and then we know what interventions could be put in place. So there will be a multitude of ways that we can put that in. I think the broader point then that your reference, I'm taking from your question, is how do we systematically embed that in? And then additionally, where I'd be coming from is that the same for all population groups? Because again, it goes back to this piece about the difference between health inequalities and health equity. And it's understanding that different people experience health and they have different levels of vulnerability. So the intervention and the early intervention may need to be delivered or look differently. And we also, we know that from the perspective of who is it that uses the majority of our unscheduled care, it does tend to be those who have not engaged early in what could have been the preventative elements. And that's not because they're not interested or committed to their own health. It is about the complexities that come with life, where you may have different choices than others. So it's not a straightforward answer, I'm afraid, Muriel, but it is possible in many, many instances. And it's about how we take that as a principle forward in a systematic way.
Thanks, Jennifer. That's a really helpful way of explaining it. And Fiona's going to come in as well. So I bring you in, Fiona.
Thank you. I mean, I wouldn't try to compete with Jennifer on the technical answer. I think she's given a very comprehensive answer specifically to the technical part. But Muriel, I think there's a deeper level in your question, which is about why have we measured things the way that we have in the past? And I think one of the things is that as humans, we're drawn to a simple cause and effect. So we want to believe that if we put X pounds in over here, that we get Y product over here, and that happens in a relatively short space of time. But one of the challenges of as Jennifer's just described, the complexity of the real world is that often something happens and then it's several years later that we get the Y to the X that happened over here. And that's if it's even possible to draw that direct correlation, because the reason people may experience an ill health episode or indeed an enduring health condition will be normally much more complicated than a single factor. So one of the things that we're trying to grapple with in our now kilt, as we're going to be calling it, I'm realising, sorry for that, everybody, we seem to have inadvertently taken ourselves there. But one of the challenges of that is that we're all going to have to, and I would include myself as a health consumer in this, is move away from that simplistic notion that everything can be measured in a return on investment in health or social care within a single annual cycle. That's actually naive and unrealistic, and it drives a set of behaviours and beliefs that actually are really unhelpful to shifting population health outcomes, which require a much more longer term view of that return on investment. So I don't have a simple answer yet of how we're going to do that. It's ambitious that we've set ourselves a challenge of trying to think about this in a different way, using this policy space that's been created and the planning guidance to say, right, well, within NHS Highland, can we innovate? Can we try and develop what some of this looks like that maybe hasn't been done elsewhere? So we don't know the answer, Mira, but that's exactly the space that we're trying to get into. And we'll have to feel our way gently. But that key message for the public, which is that it might take longer to demonstrate a return on investment of what we're doing, what we're spending, or indeed, as Jennifer referenced in her paper, the return on investment may be shown in a different organisation than the one that put in the investment. And as governing bodies, that's going to be difficult for all of us, where we feel an accountability to the revenue or the resource that's been given to us, to accept that we might make the investment and the benefit may be felt elsewhere. We're going to have to be really thoughtful about how we get comfortable with that reality. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. And I think you've picked up a couple of other points there. So I suppose the bit about, you're absolutely right. We like a simple cause and effect, and we like to think that things happen in isolation without complexity around it. And I think that was maybe what I was trying to articulate about a risk with regard when we were talking about the annual report from the Director of Public Health. I think, and potentially a job for Nikki in her new role and her team about comms around this, about how we tell that story in a way that makes sense to our communities, about it's not a simple cause and effect, and here's how it all ties together. So I think there's absolutely a comms piece around it so that we can get people to understand our vision around population health and partnership working and prevention and all of that sort of stuff. And I think your point there, Fiona, about accountability and, if we invest here, the benefit is maybe demonstrated over there, and how that can be quite complicated when we're talking about different organizations that work with different governance structures and different accountability setups. And I think that's going to have to be a big part of the public sector reform conversation, as well as the other conversations that we're having, is around how do we get comfortable with that, how do we articulate that, and how do we put in mechanisms to track it in a way that will align to that. So I think that's really helpful. I'm not seeing any other hands up, but I've got, Kristen, a question, and this is really, I suppose, a bit of a process question more than anything. So obviously in the past, the ADP was the thing, and we would take that through a process. We would get feedback from Scottish Government, they would approve it, we would approve it as a board, and that was our plan for the year. So I understand that sort of going forward, yes, an ADP is still a tool to kind of help us with our local planning and delivery, and that's still going to be really, really helpful. But if the operational improvement plan is kind of the thing, I suppose just in terms of process going forward, because the operational plan as it's published, so we've got a link to it in the document, but that is a plan for Scotland. I suppose just going forward, how do we think that might look for the board and for the communities if we're still potentially using the ADP, but we've got the OIP as well? How do we think that might work in terms of us approving it, adopting it, and communicating it?
So this is really topical, and I've been discussing it with the other DOPs nationally as well, and we're all trying to figure it all out. So what we've kind of, Fiona might have a different view, but what we've kind of come to is the ADP this year is what we're doing, and what we're working towards achieving those deliverables in that. We've ensured and we've cross-checked. So we have actually developed our own OIP document that we are kind of internally looking at. Okay, so all of the different objectives and priorities that the government have set out in their national plan, we've ensured we are working on that through our annual delivery plan. And if there's gaps, we're working with execs and leads around that. So there's assurance there, but we will keep monitoring through the ADP, and then we will cross-check through our own monitoring really of this OIP that we've got, and we're taking it through EDG at various times. What we couldn't get clarity on when we asked was what that expectation would be from the kind of Scottish Government Exec Reform Renewal Group, how are we going to report that through? So at the moment, it's still the annual delivery plan. We're still doing that. And the reassurance is that we've cross-checked the OIP. And obviously Fiona's got her weekly meetings around planned care. That's going to, we've got our CFSD exec work through the unscheduled care as well, and it'll just grow as the year goes on. And it's a moving feast. That's the only way I can describe it really at the moment. It's a moving feast, and we're waiting for further clarity from the government around what would be that performance monitoring framework they would be expecting us to deliver on. But at this present moment in time, it remains the annual delivery plan. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've used the word movable feast a few times in today's meeting as well, which is maybe kind of indicative of where we are in the world at the moment. No, that's helpful. And I suppose it's, I think we talked about this quite early on. What's in the operational improvement plan is going to be so well aligned with what's already in our ADP. It's not as if we're there's a fork in the road. I suppose they're obviously very, very close. So that's helpful to understand how we'll kind of use that going forward. Sorry, Kristen, you wanted to come back in.
So how I'm seeing it in my head is though that the ADP spans all of our well themes. It's vast, it covers all of the deliverables that we do as a board. How I see the OIP, the operational improvement plan, is these 4 areas. They're quite specific, and they're the priorities really. So that's how we're seeing that. That's in my head how I'm kind of seeing it. If that's what they're going to be focusing on the delivery, we'll ensure the whole ADP is delivered, working on that. But that is the kind of spotlight for me that they're looking at, and that's where the scrutiny really is at the moment. That's how I'm seeing it.
Yeah, that's actually really helpful, Kristen. I think I can almost see that, I think, as well. So yeah, the ADP is kind of everything we want to do this year, and the operational improvement plan is you don't want to call them, then it's not that they're any more important than other bits, but it's just the level of focus. So I think actually that's a really helpful mental image. Alex, I'll bring you in, please.
Yeah, it was that risk that does bother me a little bit, because the OIP, the KPIs in the OIP are going to be what the politicians are looking at, whereas our ADP KPIs are what we want to achieve in the rest of the service. So is there a risk that the focus on the OIP will take away from the resource that we have to do all the other things?
Kristen.
So I'd like to reassure you that no, that's not the case, and we are committed to delivering, and we will keep performance managing the annual delivery plan. But you are right in the sense of, especially when we've seen the work around planned care and now unscheduled care, which has really taken off these last few weeks. You know, there is demand on us, capacity demand, without a doubt, definitely, to deliver on that. But they were big priorities already within our annual delivery plan, and we knew they were areas that, and financially, we know we need to focus on that. So, without sounding naive in any way, we will be working along the ADP, but we are focusing our efforts more around planned care and unscheduled care, I would definitely say, at the moment.
Thanks, Kristen. Sorry, my mute button is very sticky. I've got David and Fiona who want to come in. So maybe David, I'll bring you in first and then Fiona.
Thanks. I mean, just to say that it will inevitably take resources from both a management and an administration and reporting point of view. We've already seen that around planned care. But that is not terribly unusual. There are always focus areas that government are particularly interested in. But for the vast majority of our staff and our clinical activity that we've got, then the job still is there to do for all of those. So, and be assured that government's focus will start to shift if we let any of those go. So it's a focus lens more than necessarily a priority, as you've rightly described, Sarah, from that point of view.
Thanks, David. I mean, it's at the risk of using a phrase that's not, I suppose if we think about it in that way, as in, you know, the operational improvement plan is almost like a deep dive into certain areas of our work, but it doesn't mean that the other areas of the work aren't ongoing. It's just that that's where the magnifying glass is sitting at any one time. And I suppose one of the benefits, as you know, looking at the whole picture from my perspective, I suppose that's where I find, and this is why I was asking you the question, Kristen, that's where I find the ADP and the IPQR helpful, is that it's that broad view of kind of everything, or not everything, but, you know, a whole range of things across all bits of our service. So yeah, and I guess what we can do as well as we move forward, and this will be a job for myself and chairs of the committees, is to consider, with support from Dom and others in our governance teams, is to consider how we chunk things up and take them through our different committees to make sure that balance sits within the committee structure as well. So, you know, quite rightly, there will be a focus from the board on delivery against the OIP as well as the ADP, but then I think we can give some real consideration as to how in committees we support that balance through what we're looking at in those structures as well. Okay, Fiona, you've taken your hand down, so I'm assuming you're fine. Or do you want to come in?
Well, I'll just come in. I mean, David basically said what I was going to say, but I suppose just taking it a step further, some of the issues that we've discussed in today's board meeting are not from the OIP. So actually our existing governance is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, which is highlighting areas where we can see risk or that are requiring additional mitigation, by looking at the breadth of all the work we do. And hopefully our committee structure is covering all of the bases. And obviously I would say that mine and David's jobs are as much to look at what everybody else isn't looking at, as well as the things that the government really want us to be looking at. That's partly what we do. We're the backstops of the organisation. So I think there is a risk of that, Alex, but I think that risk is mitigated by the roles that we have, the structures we have, and the governance we have, which is much more even-handed in looking right across all of our operational areas.
Okay, no, good. I think that's been a helpful discussion, actually, because I think you're right. It's difficult, especially when we're adjusting the way that we report and look at things. I think it's tricky to understand how it's all going to fit together. But I think that discussion that we've just had and the way that that's been explained has been really helpful. And of course, as Kristen described it, as a movable feast. So we, you know, as we move forward and when we have our next board meeting, we'll start to see how these things slot together in real life. So I think that's been really helpful. I'm not seeing any other hands up, so we'll summarise this. There's quite a lot of recommendations. I'm not going to read them word for word, but I'm just going to whiz us through them. So we're being to note the frameworks that have been published. Note that our annual delivery plan has been approved as a robust foundation for 25-26. Note that those have been considered within the evolving context and they will remain a valuable tool, as we've said. Note that there will be a focus on delivery of the operational improvement plan and all the stuff that's included in there. Note that the chief executives are required to provide a consolidated progress report to Scottish Government executive group meetings. Note our current position statement, and note that as the strategic framework and the 10-year strategy develop, delivery plans and performance reporting will continue to be assurance mechanisms to our relevant committees. And we are being offered moderate assurance around this at this time, which I think is fine. Is everybody, are people content with that level of assurance? Great. Okay, fabulous. Right, I'm going to suggest that we take our lunch break now. So we'll take half an hour. So I'll see you back here at approximately 2 minutes past. Thanks, everyone.